Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Montgomery Heart and Wellness, Dr. Montgomery's Clinical Pearls. It seems like this topic of athletes dying suddenly is one that I'm hearing too much about. In my feed earlier this week, was information about Chris Smith. He's retired. He's not really retired. He's an ex-NFL player. He played with the Cleveland Browns. He also played with I think he played with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he played about 8 or 9 years in the NFL. He was currently playing with the XFL League, and I think it was this past Monday after a game. In fact, he played with the Seattle Sea Dragons. And after this game, he was apparently found dead. I think he was found dead in his home. It's not really revealed as to the cause of death. From the general descriptions I'm reading from different reports, and I held off on talking about this in hopes of getting more details, but no details, more details have come up. But apparently he was found dead. It implies sudden cardiac arrest, but it's hard to speculate. But very unfortunate, 31-year-old. And again, first and foremost, may he rest in peace. And my thoughts and prayers go out to the family members. Frequently, I have these discussions related to certain health issues when it affects someone that we all know. It's the benefit is that it draws all of our attention. When someone who's well known or famous has a certain health condition, it brings that health condition to the forefront. And I like to take the opportunity to make us all aware of the fact that health issues like sudden cardiac death is very common, and oftentimes we may hear about it even among our family members and give little thought to it, and sometimes we have to step back and give some perspective. So hopefully what I plan to do today is share some information with you regarding cardiac arrest, why an athlete who is young and healthy would be someone who would be subjected to cardiac arrest. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And a couple of things I want to share with you regarding cardiac arrest. And first and foremost, I want to start off with a study done by Dr. Barry J. Marin, whom I met a number of years ago. I brought him to Houston along with a number of other experts to talk about cardiovascular issues to a group of primary care doctors. And he talked about, one common cause of sudden death in athletes. Now, before we get into this, I want you to hit the thumbs up button, like, share, and please subscribe to the station if you hadn't had a chance to do so. But this study that I'm going to share with you is a study done, a registry study, and they looked at a 27-year period. This is from 1980 to 2006. And over that period of time, they analyzed there were about 1,866 deaths. Now, again, you can, talk about, okay, how accurate this number is. You can only imagine the communication tools we had back in 1980. Newspaper reports, obituaries and the like. Imagine were methods in which they, got these numbers. But what they found in this time period was 1,866 athletes died suddenly or survived the cardiac arrest. So they either did not survive or survived. So everybody that suffered a cardiac arrest or presumed cardiac arrest composes 1,866 athletes. This again was from the year 1980 to 2006. And it'll cover about 38 different sports. And so the increase from this time period from 1980 to 1993 and during the 1994 2006 period represented an increase of 6% per year. So you had 576 deaths between the year 1980 to 1993. So that's a 13-year period of time. So roughly that first half of that period. And then the second half of that period, you had about 1,290. So that was a pretty significant increase in um, sudden death, and they estimated about a 6% increase per year. I want you to put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to that point toward the end of my overall points. But the point is that there was an increased number of sudden cardiac arrests over time. Now, you can say, put a lot of, things behind that, but just put a pin in that. We'll come back to that. Sudden deaths were predominantly due to cardiovascular disease. That's 1,049, about 56%. Blunt trauma that caused structural damage. So maybe, they were motor vehicle accident, racing motorcycles, or racing speed cars or something, blunt trauma to the chest that caused structural damage. Commotional cordis, 3%. Okay, now we talked about Damar Hamlin, who talked about commotio cordis being the most common cause. I disagree with that. Then the data suggests that it's much less common than structural heart disease. And then heat stroke, about 2%. So among the 1,049 cardiovascular deaths that occurred, the highest number. So these are the number of deaths, the total number of cardiac arrests, but these are the deaths. The highest number of events in a single year was 76, with an average of 66 deaths per year. And so 82% occurred during competition and training. And the most common cardiovascular causes were hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Okay. And then congenital coronary artery anomaly was second to that, 17%. Many of you who are old basketball fans may remember Pistol Pete Maravich. Pistol Pete Maravich played for a number of teams. He was a top-notch, I don't remember if he was on the Hall of Fame or not, but top-notch point guard. He came out of Louisiana. I think he came out of LSU, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But he played for the Boston Celtics and a number of other teams in the NBA. Well known for dribbling skills and long point shooting. Pistol Pete Maravich. He had a very long, successful NBA career. However, after he retired, he was playing pickup basketball with a friend, a colleague, and this was at the age of 44. And he had sudden cardiac arrest on the basketball court. And interestingly enough, his friend was a physician that tried to resuscitate him, was not able to. The autopsy showed that he had a congenital coronary anomaly. In fact, he had a rare congenital anomaly known as single coronary artery outlet. So the right, normally from the aorta, which is the main artery where the blood comes out from the heart, you have a branch comes out from the left side, which is the left main, and you have the right coronary artery. And then the left main branches into what's called the LAD, and then the circumflex. So the branch from the LAD goes in the front of the heart, the circumflex goes around the back, and sometimes it gives off the back, the artery goes in the back and the bottom, but that's only 10% of the times. The right coronary artery typically goes around, and it gives off what's called the PDA, a posterior descending artery. The names are not that important, but the deal with Pistol Pete Maravich is that he had an artery, the right artery, instead of coming off the right, it came off the left, and it kinked around toward the back and went to the right. And the fact that it went around the back, it was between the pulmonary vein, the pulmonary trunk, and also the aorta. And so it was a risk of it kinking off. And so what happens that, it kinked off and it occluded, and he went into cardiac arrest, probably electrical arrest, and which led to his unfortunate demise. So that's a well-known situation where you have a congenital coronary anomaly, and all congenital coronary anomalies are not that life-threatening. I've done a number of heart caths where I've seen these congenital takeoffs, and oftentimes I'll do other imaging studies to make sure it's not a compromised vessel. But frequently, it's a situation where it's just a benign congenital abnormality. There's some that can be life-threatening, as was the case with Pistol Pete Maravich. pistol PM average. Now, if you look at these numbers, again, the average of 66 deaths per year, the highest year is 76. Now, there are a lot of people looking at the current situation. There seems like there are more reports of young athletes dying suddenly. There are many people saying, well, it's because of the previous pandemic and the infections or the lockdowns or the vaccine or whatever. So there's a lot of speculation as to why there's an increase in the number of sudden deaths we're seeing in athletes. But again, earlier, I want to point something out is that if you look at the time period from 1980 to 1993, there were 576, sudden cardiac arrest events. That was 31%. And then that's the first half of this 27-year period. However, the second half of this 27-year period is more than 2 to 1. So from 1994 to 2006, there were even more sudden deaths. So we had already been seeing this increase in cardiac arrest among athletes prior to this time. So that's, you can argue, go way back to whenever, 1980, as this article may imply, and there seems to be an upward trajectory of the number of athletes suffering cardiac arrest. So the question becomes, why is that the case? Because, increased number, I mean, certainly is nothing related to the recent pandemic back in 1994. So we have to take into account that there was an upward trajectory that started to occur even before this recent pandemic. And so I have some thoughts of my own, which I'll share with you. But another thing of consideration I want us to bring into play here is that, our ability to report and detect things is also improving over time. So meaning that, 1980, I mean, heck, I remember 1980, you had, here in Houston, we had 2 newspapers, and, you got the news delivered by a newspaper, and it was on paper. And then you had, magazines, and everything's in print. Most of the communications in print. I didn't have the internet or Google. We had, encyclopedias. In fact, my encyclopedias, you can see them right over my shoulder here. Those green and tan books right there on my bookshelf. Those are encyclopedias that I used when I was a young kid studying, getting my work. So the ability to communicate and report things back in 1980, or I should say between the year 1980 to 1994, was much different than our communication abilities from 94 to 2006. I remember in 94, I was in the first year of my electrophysiology fellowship. The internet was starting to kind of creep its way and impact a lot of what we were doing then, and certainly more so in 2006. Now we're in a situation where you've got social media and you have, many other ways to communicate. So the point I'm making is this: there are a number of variables that went into the increase in quote unquote cardiac arrest from the year 1980 to 1993 compared to the year 1994-2006. The other factors that may have influenced those increase in numbers, the fact that we were reporting it more, could be a reason why the numbers are higher. I'm not saying it's the only reason. I'm just saying we have to, if you want to analyze this from a scientific standpoint, you want to sort of, be analytical and look at all the possible variables at play and think about how these variables can influence things. Having said that, when we look at, the quote unquote increased number of cardiac arrests among athletes today compared to before, we have to consider 2 things. One, there was already an upward trajectory of increased sudden cardiac arrest prior to this time. That's number one. Number 2, you have to take into consideration of the fact that our ability to report, detect information, or transfer information, I should say, now is far greater than it was but in the period of 94 to 2006, and even greater than it was between the 80s, 1980 and 1993. So that's just two variables right there. Well, not two variables, but that's one major impact that we have to consider, I should say, when we look at the change in numbers over time. Could it just be simply a fact that I mean, so let me put the argument this way. Let's say the rate of sudden cardiac death in athletes from 1980 to 2023 has always been the same. It's just that now we are able to communicate more effectively, and the amount of reported cases are higher now than before. I don't think that's the cause, but I'm just making the argument, an extreme argument, to say that we have to consider that contributing factor at very least. Now, having said that, then we say, okay, fine. Is that the case? What are the things we can look at to say that something else could be, in fact? Is it just the fact that we communicate more, or we can report more of these episodes or cases, or the other factors at play? I think there are other factors at play. So then we have to say, okay, how do we determine that to be the case? This looks at data, and now this is worldwide data, athlete collapses and deaths from 2021 to 2023. In the blue are the collapses, the red are the deaths. So you see a big peak here, and then there's an oscillation there, and a little bit of oscillation and drop there. Now, if you look at this is from 2021. That's January 2021. This is January 2022. And this is January 2023. So January 2021, right here. Okay. And then you start to see this big peak here, and a drop, and another peak, and a drop, etc. So people say, well, okay, what was going on? Well, a lot of things going on now. People want to speculate about the vaccine. Of course, COVID had peaked back here. Uh, but maybe we were getting out, more people getting infected with COVID. So maybe there was more COVID-induced myocarditis among athletes. They were getting back out. You had the lockdown here. So that's certainly a possibility. The other possibility, you were releasing vaccines here. So maybe vaccine-induced myocarditis. We know that vaccine-induced myocarditis is a real abnormality that's seen in men that are athletes of this age. So clearly, this is certainly a potential contributing factor. But then, post lockdown, people were eating bad food. They were stressed out. There were other factors related to our response to the pandemic that may have contributed to, this factor as well. So again, there are a lot of things happening. Like, it's not as clear cut as we may think it is, even though factors like COVID or vaccine, et cetera, may be contributing to this. We can't just blindly say, okay, that's it. So, what else do we have to consider? And my theory is simply this. My argument is that we're just getting sicker. My argument is that we as a population are getting sicker, and because we as a population are getting sicker, at any age, we're subjected to, worse outcomes. And I'm going to share the screen with you in just a minute. I want to look at hello, everyone in the chat. Let's see. Willem Morrison says, because there's almost twice as many competitive athletes as in the 1980s, maybe. Okay, that's a great thought. Willem Morrison, maybe also with the lockdowns from COVID, more athletes got out of shape. Combination reasons. That's great. Again, I like the thinking there. So you're looking at multiple factors as opposed to just jumping on top of saying, okay, this is just one thing. How much athlete dropped dead since 2021? The date on that, nobody's looking at it closely. The date on that is not very strong. So they were supposed to get, okay, the jab. People talking about the jab. So I wonder if they had the, NFL. Okay, so people are talking about. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. In fact, I'm going to share some information with you guys about my thoughts on the vaccine. But I think it's more complex than that in terms of what we're dealing with here. Let me share my screen with you again. And I've shown this graph before. If you look at U.S. life expectancy, and they say it drops in the 21st century, um, here you have a situation where from 1995, life expectancy in the United States go up and up. A dip right here in 2014. Okay. Now you notice that, now, of course, from 1980 to 93, that was before this curve, there was a lower sudden death than from 94 on up. But despite that, among young people, our overall life expectancy went up. Then you have a little bit of a dip in 2014, somewhat of a plateau. But then 2019, now this was before the pandemic, before the lockdowns, before the vaccine, et cetera, we had a very sharp decline in life expectancy and then another sharp drop in life expectancy. Now, this is based on insurance actuarial data, life insurance actuarial data, and life insurance company insure people who are relatively young and healthy. So while it's probably not, heavily even though the age group is from 18 to 64, that's where this data is pulled from. It's probably more representative of people in, say, their 30s, 40s, or 50s, maybe 60s, but not as representative of people who are like, below the age of 18, or certainly not below the age of 15. But nevertheless, it represents the young, healthy, the relatively healthiest group in our population, because the sickest people will not be getting the life insurance, at least not at the time of their illness. Some illnesses will be represented here because you get your life insurance and then you get diagnosed with an illness once you have it, and so you don't lose it. But you had a sudden drop here in 2019 and also another drop here in 2020. This indicates that somehow we reached a tipping point, and we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker over time, and you know there's only so much pharmacological agents can do. There's only so much that surgeries can do. Only so much that hospitalization can do. And you get to a point where you cannot prolong someone's life. Let alone, you can't prolong quality of life for sure. And we get to a point where we can't even prolong their lives because we're getting becoming so sicker. And so then you have to say, well, why are we getting sicker? So we're getting sicker not only the older people, but younger people are getting sicker. I'm saying younger people meaning in their teens, 20s, and 30s, coming in with chest pain, heart failure, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, peripheral vascular disease, history of stroke, etc. These are people in their prime coming in, pre-prime, I should say, coming in with these chronic illnesses. So we are getting sicker as a society, and that's a huge problem that we have to consider. So if we think of that as the undergirding process, then we have to say, okay, well, what? Let's step back and look at the basics. What are the general risk factors for anybody having sudden cardiac arrest? Well, family history of coronary disease. So there's an underlying genetic component that tells you how you're going to break down. There's smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. There's obesity, lack of due to a sedentary lifestyle. There's diabetes, and of course, as I said, an inactive lifestyle. So when you really look at it, you don't have to invoke too many theories. Yes, the reaction to the pandemic certainly had an impact. I seriously believe it did. And I think our ability to report these things also had an impact. But I think the real undergirding issue is the fact that we as a population are getting sicker, and as a population, as we become more ill, these chronic illnesses that used to not plague us until we were in our 70s and 80s or whatever the case was, now are encroaching upon our population at earlier and earlier ages. So if, of course, the vast majority of people don't smoke, maybe there's some vaping, that's a problem. But, if you're having more high blood pressure among the young and healthy, having more high cholesterol among the young and healthy, more obesity, more diabetes, and more young people being inactive. So then you're going to have more young people suffering cardiac arrest, or being at risk for cardiac arrest. And so these are the types of things we want to take into consideration, largely because it's one thing to say, well, it's this or it's that. But then if we look at the fact that we're all becoming collectively less healthy, then that's something that we really have to do something about. And that's something that we really have to uh, um, um, make amends with. So, my take is that despite what other theories there may be, I think these other things may very well be contributing to our overall uh, um, um, the overall risk of increased sudden death in young people. But I think the underlying problem and the foundation of this increase and the foundation of this worsening of health is our progressive sickness, our progressive, poor health. So, again, my thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Chris, the late Chris Smith. May he rest in peace. And again, it's extremely unfortunate. Someone who's 31 years old. It's just horrible to know that the life of some young man. And I understand he tragically lost his girlfriend, I think, a few years earlier to a motor vehicle accident. They had a young child together. So this is an extreme tragedy for, I think, his young daughter. So let's all keep him and his family in our prayers, his family in our prayers, and may his soul rest in peace. But thank you for watching. If you got any good information out of this, please share this with loved ones. And also give us a thumbs up, help us in the Google algorithm, and subscribe if you hadn't had a chance to. Until next time, take care of yourself and look forward to seeing you in the next video.